CD5. Lord Mount Drago by W. Somerset Maugham. Dr. Audlin looked at the clock on his desk. It was 20 minutes to 6. He was surprised that Lord Mount Drago was late, since he had always been on time for previous appointments. Lord Mount Drago's appointment today was for 5:30. There was, in Dr. Audlin's appearance, nothing to attract attention. He was tall and thin, with narrow shoulders. He was a little bent. His hair was thin and grey. His long, pale face was deeply lined. He was not more than 50, but he looked older. His eyes, pale blue and rather large, were tired. When you had been with him for a time, you noticed that they moved very little. They remained fixed on your face, but they were so empty of expression that this caused no discomfort. They gave no idea of his thoughts, nor changed with the words he spoke. His hands were rather large, with long fingers. They were soft, but firm. You could never have described what Dr. Audlin wore unless you looked specifically. His clothes were dark. His tie was black. His dress made his pale face paler. Dr. Audlin was a psychoanalyst who had entered the profession by accident. When the war started, he had not been working long and was gaining experience at different hospitals. He offered his services and after a time was sent out to France. It was then that he discovered his strange qualities. He could stop certain pains by the touch of his firm hands, and by talking to men who were suffering from sleeplessness, he could often cause them to sleep. He spoke slowly. His voice had no particular quality, and its sound did not change with the words he used, but it was musical and soft. He told the men that they must rest, that they mustn't worry, that they must sleep, and the rest seemed to slip into their tired bones. Calmness pushed their anxieties away, and sleep fell on their tired eyelids like the light rain of spring on the earth. Dr. Audlin found that by speaking to men in his low voice, by looking at them with his pale, quiet eyes, by touching their tired heads with his long, firm hands, he could calm them. Sometimes he performed cures that seemed like miracles. He brought back speech to a man who was unable to speak after being buried under the earth in an explosion, and he gave back the use of his legs to a man who could not move after his plane was shot down. He could not understand his powers, but the results of his work were clear to everyone, and he had to admit to himself that he had some strange quality that allowed him to do things for which he could offer no explanation. When the war was over, he went to Vienna and studied there, and afterwards to Zurich, and then he settled in London to practice the art which he had so strangely learnt. He had been practising now for 15 years, and was well known. People told one another of the astonishing things he had done, and though his charges were high, many came to him for his advice. He knew that he had done a great deal of good in the world. He had brought back health and happiness to many. But at the back of his mind, he was never quite sure how he had done so. He did not like using a power which he could not understand, and he thought it was dishonest to make money from patients who believed in him when he had no belief in himself. He was rich enough now to live without working, and the work made him very tired. He had seen a lot of human nature during his 15 years in Wimpole Street. The stories that had been told to him, sometimes easily, sometimes with shame, with anger, had stopped surprising him long ago. Nothing could shock him any more. He knew by now that men were liars, that they were proud. He knew far worse than that about them, but he also knew that it was not his duty to judge. But year after year, these terrible truths told to him made his face a little greyer, its lines a little more marked, and his pale eyes more tired. He rarely laughed, but sometimes, when he read a book, he smiled. Did the writers really think men and women were like that? Real people had much darker, more complicated souls. It was 6:15. Dr. Audlin could remember no case which was stranger than that of Lord Mountdrago. For one thing, it was strange because Lord Mountdrago was a successful and famous man. He had been appointed Foreign Minister when still under 40 years of age, and it was generally agreed that he was the cleverest man in his party. There was nothing to prevent Lord Mountdrago from continuing as Foreign Minister in later governments. Lord Mountdrago had many good qualities. He was intelligent and worked hard. He had travelled widely and spoke several languages well. He knew a great deal about other countries. He had courage and determination. He was a good speaker. He was a tall, good-looking man, though perhaps rather heavy. At the age of 24, he had married a girl of 18, whose father was a lord and whose American mother was very rich, so that he had a good position and wealth. He also had 2 sons. He had, in fact, much of what was necessary to make him a popular and successful man. But unfortunately, he also had many faults. He was very proud of his social position. For 300 years his family had held the title of Lord Mountdrago and had married into the oldest families of England. But he still never missed an opportunity of telling others about it. He had beautiful manners when he wanted to show them, but he did this only with people whom he considered his equals. He was rude to his servants and his secretaries. The lower officials in the government offices feared and hated him. He knew that he was a great deal cleverer than most of the people he worked with, and never missed an opportunity of telling them so. He had no patience with the weaknesses of human nature. He felt himself born to command, and was angry when people expected him to listen to their arguments, or wished to hear the reasons for his decisions. He had many enemies to whom he showed no pity. He had no friends. He was unpopular with his party because he was so proud, but he loved his country so much and managed affairs so well that they had to accept his faults. It was possible to do this because sometimes he could be quite charming. He could be the best company in the world, and you could forget that he had insulted you the day before, and was quite able to insult you again. Lord Mountdrago had almost failed to become Dr. Audlin's patient. A secretary had telephoned the doctor and told him that his lordship would be glad if the doctor would come to his house at 10 o'clock on the following morning. Dr. Audlin answered that he was unable to go to Lord Mountdrago's house, but would be pleased to see him in Wimpole Street on the day after that. The secretary took the message and telephoned again to say that Lord Mountdrago was determined to see Dr. Audlin in his own house, and the doctor could charge what he liked. Dr. Audlin replied that he only saw people in his own room, and explained that unless Lord Mountdrago was prepared to come to him, he could not give him his attention. In a quarter of an hour, a short message was delivered to him that his lordship would come, not in 2 days' time, but the next day at 5 o'clock. When Lord Mountdrago was announced, he did not come forward, but stood at the door and looked the doctor up and down. Dr. Audlin could see that he was very angry. He saw a big, heavy man with greying hair, a swollen face, and a cold, proud expression. He had the look of an 18th-century French king. "It seems that it is extremely difficult to see you, Dr. Audlin. I'm a very busy man." "Won't you sit down?" said the doctor. His face showed no sign that Lord Mountdrago's speech had had any effect on him. Dr. Audlin sat in his chair at the desk. Lord Mountdrago still stood and looked angrier. "I think I should tell you that I am the Foreign Minister," he said sharply. "Won't you sit down?" the doctor repeated. Lord Mountdrago made a movement which appeared to suggest that he was about to turn and leave the room, but if that was his intention, he seemed to change his mind. He sat down. Dr. Audlin opened a large book and took up his pen. He wrote without looking at his patient. "How old are you?" 42. "Are you married?" "Yes." "How long have you been married?" 18 years. "Have you any children?" "I have 2 sons." Dr. Audlin wrote down the facts as Lord Mountdrago answered. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at him. He did not speak. He just looked with pale blue eyes that did not move. "Why have you come to see me?" he asked at last. "I've heard about you. Lady Canute comes to see you, I believe. She tells me you've done a certain amount of good." Dr. Audlin did not reply. His eyes remained fixed on the other's face, but they were so empty of expression that you might have thought he did not even see him. "I can't perform miracles," he said at last. Not a smile, but the shadow of a smile passed over his eyes. Lord Mountdrago spoke in a more friendly way. "You have a good name. People seem to believe in you." "Why have you come to see me?" repeated Dr. Audlin.